The moment Ellie Parker walked into his office with that determined look in her eyes, Mark Collins knew his carefully constructed world was about to change forever. "We're both adults, right?" she'd said, closing his office door behind her. Those 6 words would transform everything for this overworked single father who'd spent 5 years believing love wasn't in the cards for him anymore. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt stories that remind us second chances are always possible, even when we least expect them. Mark Collins stared at the clock on his kitchen wall, 6:17 a.m. He'd been up since 4:30, preparing lunches, reviewing homework, and ironing uniforms. His daughter Sophie's science project sat half-finished on the dining table, a volcano they'd promised to complete together last night before exhaustion claimed them both. "Dad! Have you seen my blue hair ribbon?" Sophie's voice echoed down the hallway of their modest 2-bedroom apartment. "Check the laundry basket," Mark called back, flipping a pancake while simultaneously reviewing quarterly reports on his tablet. The promotion to senior account manager at Parker Financial Solutions had been a blessing financially but a curse for his already stretched schedule. At 34, Mark had mastered the art of efficiency. 5 years of single parenthood had transformed him from a carefree marketing executive to a man who could pack a nutritionally balanced lunch while reciting multiplication tables and responding to work emails, all before 7 a.m. "Found it." Sophie appeared in the doorway, her dark curls, so like her mother's, bouncing as she skipped toward the breakfast counter. At 9 years old, she carried an old soul's wisdom behind her eyes, a side effect of losing her mother to cancer when she was just 4. "Volcano duty tonight?" Mark asked, sliding a plate of pancakes toward her. "Promise?" Sophie's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "You promised yesterday too." The guilt stabbed at him. "Cross my heart. No late meetings today." Sophie nodded, accepting his promise with the cautious optimism of a child who'd heard similar assurances before. Mark dropped Sophie at school by 7:45 and arrived at Parker Financial Solutions by 8:15, 15 minutes before most of his colleagues. The early arrival gave him precious time to prepare for his 9 a.m. presentation to the executive team, a presentation that could determine whether he'd receive the director position he'd been eyeing for months. The office was quiet except for the distant hum of the cleaning crew. Mark settled at his desk, spreading his notes across the polished surface. The director position would mean more money but also more flexibility to work from home. For Sophie, it would mean a father who could attend school plays without checking his phone every 5 minutes. "You're here early." Mark looked up to find Ellie Parker, company founder, CEO, and his direct boss, standing in his doorway. At 40, Ellie was a force of nature in tailored suits and sensible heels. She'd built Parker Financial from nothing after leaving a prestigious firm that had refused to promote her despite her bringing in their biggest clients. "Just preparing for the presentation," Mark replied, straightening his tie. Ellie nodded, her sharp eyes taking in the family photo on his desk, Mark and Sophie at the beach last summer, both smiling despite the sunburn they'd acquired that day. "How's Sophie doing?" she asked, surprising him. Though Ellie knew he was a single parent, she rarely inquired about his personal life. "She's good. Working on a volcano science project that's currently taking over our dining table." A smile softened Ellie's usually serious expression. "Baking soda and vinegar?" "The classic approach," Mark confirmed. "I made one with my dad when I was about her age," Ellie said, a distant look crossing her face before she snapped back to her professional demeanor. "I'll see you at 9, Collins." The presentation went flawlessly. Mark had always excelled at translating complex financial strategies into compelling narratives that even the most technology-averse board members could understand. When he finished, the room erupted in approving nods and thoughtful questions. "Excellent work, Mark," Ellie concluded the meeting. "I'd like to discuss some of these ideas further." "My office, 4 o'clock?" Mark's heart sank. 4 o'clock would stretch into 5, and he'd promised Sophie they'd finish her project tonight. But saying no to the CEO wasn't an option if he wanted that director position. Of course, he agreed, already mentally drafting an apologetic text to Mrs. Hernandez, their elderly neighbor who watched Sophie after school. The day raced by in a blur of client calls and spreadsheet revisions. At 3:55, Mark stood outside Ellie's office, straightening his tie and reviewing his notes one last time. "Come in, Mark," Ellie called when he knocked. Her office was a study in minimalist elegance, clean lines, modern furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Unlike many executives who decorated with golf trophies or family photos, Ellie's personal touches were subtle, a small collection of antique financial ledgers and a single photograph of an older man Mark assumed was her father. "Have a seat," she gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Your presentation this morning was impressive." "Thank you," Mark replied, settling into the chair and opening his portfolio. "I've prepared some additional projections based on the questions from the board." Ellie held up her hand. "Before we get to that, I wanted to discuss something else." She leaned back in her chair, studying him with an intensity that made him nervous. "You've been with us for 3 years now, correct?" 3 years next month, Mark confirmed. "And in that time, you've consistently delivered exceptional work while raising your daughter alone." It wasn't a question but an observation. Mark nodded, unsure where this was heading. "I've also noticed," Ellie continued, "that you're always the first to arrive and among the last to leave. You work through lunches, take calls on weekends, and I can't remember the last time you took a vacation." Mark shifted uncomfortably. Was this a compliment on his work ethic or criticism of his time management? "I'm committed to my job," he said carefully. "Clearly." Ellie stood and walked to her window, looking out at the city below. "But I'm concerned about sustainability." "I assure you, I can handle the workload," Mark said quickly, worried she was reconsidering him for the director position. Ellie turned to face him. "I'm not questioning your capabilities, Mark. I'm questioning whether our company is supporting you properly." She returned to her desk and opened a folder. "The director position you applied for, it would mean more responsibility." "I'm ready for it," Mark insisted. "I believe you are," Ellie agreed. "But I'm proposing some modifications to the role." For the next 20 minutes, Ellie outlined a restructured position, same title, same salary increase, but with flexible hours and the option to work from home 2 days a week. The changes would allow Mark to be more present for Sophie while still advancing his career. "Why would you do this?" Mark asked when she finished, genuinely confused. Corporate America wasn't known for accommodating single parents. Ellie's professional demeanor slipped for a moment. "My father raised me alone after my mother left. He worked himself to exhaustion trying to provide for me while being there for every science fair and piano recital." She gestured to the photograph on her shelf. "He died of a heart attack when I was 22. The doctors said stress was a contributing factor." Mark didn't know what to say. "I'm not running a charity, Mark," Ellie continued, her business voice returning. "This is a strategic decision. You're valuable to this company, and I'd rather modify a position than lose a top performer to burnout." "I don't know what to say," Mark admitted. "Say you'll consider it," Ellie replied, closing the folder. "And go home. It's after 5, and I believe there's a volcano waiting for your attention." Mark glanced at his watch in alarm. 5:17 p.m. He'd promised Sophie. "Go," Ellie insisted. "We can finish this tomorrow." Mark gathered his things quickly. "Thank you, Ms. Parker." "Ellie," she corrected him with a small smile. "If we're going to restructure your position, we should at least be on a first-name basis." Mark made it home by 5:45, a record for a weekday. Sophie's face lit up when he walked through the door, her surprise quickly turning to excitement when he announced they had the entire evening for volcano construction. They worked together at the dining table, mixing papier-mâché and discussing the finer points of volcanic eruptions. For the first time in months, Mark wasn't checking his phone every few minutes or thinking about tomorrow's meetings. "Dad?" Sophie asked as they waited for the first layer to dry. Mark looked up from where he was cutting strips of newspaper. "Are you happy?" The question caught him off guard. "Of course I am, sophomore." "Why do you ask?" Sophie shrugged, focusing intently on the paint colors she was mixing. "Sometimes you look sad when you think I'm not watching. And you work all the time." Mark set down his scissors, his heart aching. Children noticed everything. "I have a good job and the best daughter in the world," he said carefully. "But sometimes I wish I had more time to spend with you." "That might be changing soon, though." Sophie looked up, interested. "Really?" Mark explained the modified director position in terms she could understand: more money for their vacation fund and more time for science projects and movie nights. "Your boss sounds nice," Sophie observed. "She is," Mark agreed, surprised to realize he meant it. He'd always respected Ellie Parker professionally, but today had revealed a compassionate side he hadn't expected. The next morning, Mark arrived at the office to find an email from Ellie requesting another meeting that afternoon. This time, he entered her office with less anxiety and more curiosity. "I've been thinking about your proposal," he began after they'd exchanged greetings. "And?" Ellie prompted. "I'd like to accept, with one condition." Mark took a deep breath. "I want to build a similar program for other employees with caregiving responsibilities, not just parents, but anyone caring for family members." Ellie's eyebrows rose. "That's an ambitious proposal." "It's also good business," Mark countered. "Reduced turnover, increased loyalty, better work-life balance leading to higher productivity." A slow smile spread across Ellie's face. "Make me a presentation. If it's as good as yesterday's, you might have yourself a deal." Their professional relationship evolved over the following weeks. Mark accepted the director position and began working on his flexibility initiative. Ellie became a regular sounding board, offering insights from her decade of business ownership. Their meetings often ran late, but now it was by choice rather than obligation. Mark discovered that beneath Ellie's formidable exterior was a woman with a sharp wit and genuine passion for creating a different kind of workplace than the one that had rejected her years ago. One evening, as they reviewed his proposal in the nearly empty office, Ellie suddenly asked, "How did you do it? After your wife died?" Mark looked up, startled by the personal question. "One day at a time," he answered honestly. "Some days were just about survival, making sure Sophie was fed, clothed, and loved. The bigger stuff, sometimes it had to wait." Ellie nodded, her expression thoughtful. "My father used to say something similar. He called it triage parenting, handling the most critical needs first and forgiving yourself for the rest." "Smart man," Mark said. "He was," Ellie agreed, a hint of sadness in her voice. "He would have liked you." The comment hung in the air between them, more personal than anything they'd shared before. Mark found himself studying Ellie's face, the intelligent eyes, the determined set of her jaw, the rare smile that transformed her features when it appeared. "Sophie wants to meet you," Mark said suddenly. "She thinks you're some kind of superhero boss who's giving her dad back." Ellie laughed, the sound bright in the quiet office. "Hardly a superhero. Just someone who learned from watching her father struggle." "Still," Mark continued, "she's making lasagna this weekend, her specialty, if you can call anything a 9-year-old cook's a specialty. You'd be welcome to join us." The invitation surprised him as much as it seemed to surprise her. Ellie hesitated, and for a moment Mark thought he'd overstepped. Then she smiled, not her professional smile, but something warmer. "I'd like that," she said simply. Saturday evening found Ellie at their apartment door, looking different in jeans and a casual sweater, a bottle of sparkling cider in one hand and a children's book about famous women in business in the other. Sophie took to Ellie immediately, proudly showing off her volcano, which had earned an A+, and peppering her with questions about running a company. Ellie answered each one seriously, treating Sophie with the same respect she showed her executive team. Dinner was a success despite the slightly overcooked pasta and excessive garlic. They talked and laughed, and Mark realized it was the first time their apartment had felt truly alive since before his wife's illness. As the evening wound down, Sophie excused herself to call her friend about a homework assignment, leaving Mark and Ellie alone in the living room. "Thank you for coming," Mark said, collecting their dessert plates. "Sophie had a great time." "So did I," Ellie replied, helping him clear the table. Their hands brushed as she passed him a glass, and neither pulled away immediately. "It's been a long time since I had a family dinner." "Same here," Mark admitted. "Well, one with anyone besides Sophie and me." A comfortable silence settled between them as they finished cleaning up. When they were done, they stood in the small kitchen, suddenly awkward in a way they never were at the office. "Mark," Ellie began, then stopped, uncharacteristically hesitant. "Yes," he prompted. She took a deep breath. "I want to be clear about something. The position modifications, the flexibility initiative, those weren't because of any personal feelings. They were sound business decisions." "I know that," Mark assured her. "Good," Ellie nodded. "Because what I'm about to say is entirely personal." She met his eyes directly. "I've enjoyed getting to know you outside of work. And I'd like to continue doing so, if you're open to it." Mark felt his heart rate quicken. "Are you asking me out?" A flash of vulnerability crossed Ellie's face before she squared her shoulders in the same way she did before tough negotiations. "We're both adults, right? So yes, I'm asking if you'd be interested in exploring whatever this is between us. Separately from our professional relationship." Mark hadn't considered dating anyone since losing his wife. The thought had always seemed overwhelming, the logistics of childcare, the emotional energy required, the potential complications. But standing in his kitchen with Ellie, those concerns felt surmountable. "I'd like that," he said finally. "But there are complications. Sophie, the company." "I'm aware," Ellie interrupted gently. "I don't have all the answers, Mark. I just know that life is short, and connections like this are rare." Before he could respond, Sophie bounded back into the room, full of energy and oblivious to the moment she'd interrupted. "Ellie, do you want to see my rock collection?" she asked excitedly. "I'd love to," Ellie replied, giving Mark a look that said their conversation wasn't over. Later, after Sophie had gone to bed and Ellie was preparing to leave, they stood at the door, the evening's unfinished conversation between them. "This won't be simple," Mark said quietly. "Few worthwhile things are," Ellie replied. She reached out and briefly touched his hand. "Think about it. We can talk more when you're ready." "I don't need to think about it," Mark surprised himself by saying. "But I do need to take it slowly. For Sophie's sake." Ellie nodded. "Slowly works for me." As weeks turned into months, slowly proved to be the right approach. They began with lunch dates during work hours and occasional dinners after Sophie was asleep with Mrs. Hernandez watching her. They kept their relationship private at the office while establishing clear boundaries between their professional and personal lives. Sophie, perceptive as always, noticed the change in her father before he even mentioned it. "You smile more now," she observed one evening as they walked home from her piano lesson. "Is it because of Ellie?" Mark looked down at his daughter in surprise. "Partly," he admitted. "Does that bother you?" Sophie considered the question with the seriousness only children can bring to important matters. "Mom would want you to be happy," she said finally. "And I like Ellie. She doesn't talk to me like I'm a baby." 6 months after that first dinner, Mark and Ellie sat Sophie down for a conversation about their relationship. They answered her questions honestly, assured her that no one was trying to replace her mother, and promised that her feelings would always matter. "So you're like, boyfriend and girlfriend?" Sophie asked, wrinkling her nose at the juvenile terms. Something like,